everybody. This is Erik. It's another great day of recovery. Today, we're going to talk about step two. Um, we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. What does this mean? It means for me that I have to first admit that I don't have power, that I cannot do life. I can't stop doing whatever the addiction is. And that takes a long time for some of us. And we can go to meetings and we can actually think we're surrendered and we can think that we're not relying on self. And people could be giving advice, actually trying to encourage you to do this, or what do they do in this. But I think when we come to the end of ourselves and realize I have no good ideas, I have no more strength, and I've got to stop. This is me. That's step two, that we begin to believe that there's a power greater than ourselves can restore us to sanity. There is a little three-phase progression. It says we came to, we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves can restore us to sanity. So we came, meaning we came to meetings, we came to the literature, we started reading. After a while, we come to, we start to go, oh my gosh, I see things more clearly now. They say, don't stop there. From coming to coming to believe that you can be restored. Really important aspect. If we turn to pages 44, the bottom of page 44 in the Alcoholics Anonymous Big Book, that's the text I use for every addiction. I use all the other texts to tell me more about the problem and a little bit more about the steps, but this is the core text. It says, if a mere code of morals or better philosophy of life were sufficient to overcome alcoholism or sexaholism or compulsive eating or spending, gambling, or fixing others or work addiction, codependency, etc., many of us would have recovered long ago. But we found that such codes and philosophies did not save us, no matter how much we tried. We could wish to be moral. We could wish to be philosophically comforted. In fact, we could will these things with all our might, but the needed power wasn't there. Our human resources, as marshaled by the will, were not sufficient. They failed utterly. Lack of power. That was our dilemma. We had to find a power by which we could live, and it had to be a power greater than ourselves, obviously. Where and how were we to find this power? Well, that's exactly what this book is about. Its main object is to enable you to find a power greater than yourselves, which will solve your problem. That means we have written a book which we believe to be spiritual as well as moral. It means, of course, that we're going to talk about God. So it's as simple as that. It's so elusively simple that it slips through our fingers. And people, when you start mentioning about God and like, are you okay? So God's going to help me with my drinking problem here. All I have to do is have faith and it'll all work out. Okay. Well, we are so oriented towards this material world and towards science, and I love science. There's nothing wrong with science, or um, a number of other philosophies, education, self knowledge, psychology. That'll save me. To let go of all that and say, okay, God, please help me get sober. I'm trusting in you to help me be sober. I've heard a number of phrases over the years. I've heard this phrase, which makes me smile. It says that if you have trouble believing in a power greater than yourself, let's just start with the power other than yourself. Sure, I believe in a power greater than myself, but it's like I sometimes have to just say, Erik, stop. No more self-willed, self-directed, self-powered. It doesn't work. About any situation in which I'm powerless over. About other people, about what's going on in the world, about illness, about economics. Yeah, the more I walk in this journey, the more I see that I am much more powerless over things than I ever thought. And that my thinking won't save me. My thinking won't save me. We talked a little bit last time about how it's okay to not have God fully understood and developed. And that's where this chapter to the agnostic comes in. It says, here difficulty arises with agnostics. Many times we talk to a new man and watch his hope rise as we discuss his alcoholic or problems and explain our fellowship. But his face falls when we speak of spiritual matters, especially when we mention God. For we have opened a subject which our man thought he had neatly evaded and entirely ignored. We know how he feels. We have shared his honest doubt and prejudice. Some of us have been violently anti-religious. To others, the word God brought up a particular idea of him with which someone had tried to impress them during childhood. Perhaps we rejected this particular conception because it seemed inadequate. With that rejection, we imagined we had abandoned the God idea entirely. We were bothered with the thought that the dependence upon a power beyond ourselves was somewhat weak, even cowardly. We looked upon this world of warring individuals, warring theological systems, and inexplicable calamity with deep skepticism. Looked askance at many individuals who claimed to be godly. How could a supreme being have anything to do with it all? And who could comprehend a supreme being anyhow? Yet in other moments we found ourselves thinking, when enchanted by a starlit night, who then made all this? There was a feeling of awe and wonder, but it was fleeting and lost. And soon, yes, we of agnostic temperament have had these thoughts and experiences. Let us make haste to reassure you. We found that as soon as we were able to lay aside prejudice and express even a willingness to consider or believe in a power greater than ourselves, we commenced to get results, even though it was impossible for many of us to define or comprehend that power, which is God. So, I do this kind of work for a living. I help people who are struggling with addiction. And I often just start with, once I get to know them and they get to know me, they know I'm kind of in steps. It seems to be the most effective program for any kind of addiction. I say, let's look at this. Like, do you think in terms of a spiritual world? Do you have the idea that maybe the material world is not all that exists, that maybe there's things that can't be explained just from a biological, material worldview? And people often say, yeah, I believe it. I don't think about it all the time. They don't think about it hardly at all, but most people are kind of open to that. Again, to talk about the addiction, I said, look, we have lots and lots of science research. I think compulsive overeating is most interesting because it afflicted my life, but we have lots of science around why people are overweight. If we have all this science, if we have such good codes and philosophies, how come it's not saving us? And I don't think it's just a matter of just saying to these dear people, well, you should just try harder. What's wrong with you? We have lots of research to suggest that, there are drugs that are addictive. And sometimes the best it gets, we tell people, is just be on methadone the rest of your life. Okay. Or compulsive gambling. I've been going to trainings for years on this, and there's a very strong neurological component with it. 1 in 5 compulsive gamblers will kill themselves. Like, what is going on here? And well, alcoholism, lots has been talked about that. But codependency, like what is going on there? Are we addicted to our own hormones that feel good when we help people? And we just can't stop and we use it to help others. All addiction seems to be pretty illogical. We kind of know it's not a good thing to do, but we just can't stop doing it. Perhaps the addiction is a spiritual power greater than ourselves. What if we entertain the idea that maybe with compulsive overeating, there is something which early church called gluttony, that is some spiritual force that has sickened us where we just can't stop in our own strength. And it's a power greater than my willpower. Or gambling. Maybe there's this greed kind of spirit that tries to hook us into this, and we compulsively then spend every penny we have. Or drug addiction. Maybe there is actual demonic energies or spiritual forces trying to keep people. Oh, and let's talk about sexual addiction. Like, some of the things that people struggle with sexually makes me wonder, where did we get an idea to do that? Like, who would, and who, I've never really met someone in sexual addiction recovery that says, I chose this, I wanted to do this. I mean, the addiction kind of made them want to, but what they did, a lot of times it was unwanted. I see that even from a science point of view, if you observe this and observe recovery rates with people who turn to a higher power, that it makes a lot more sense to me that um, that these addictions are spiritual forces. And then it makes more sense why why we need God to help fight this. We've lost, well, we could count them countless. I suppose we could count them, but I'll just use the word which sounds parabolic or hyperbole to me, to say there's countless actors and entertainers and musicians lost their lives to addiction. Like, what's that about? I feel sad when I'm watching movies of, and I won't name the names, but people who have kind of sacrificed their lives to they're in movies, they sing beautifully, and they're dead. And they died from a drug overdose. And I don't know about you, but in my past, I would kind of go, well, that's so sad. Like, how can you be so talented and smart and just not stop? Just say no. You have plenty of money. And why them? Why are they more addicted? I think it's because they are in the limelight, that they might struggle with pride more, which attracts these kind of energies. We had we had movie producers giving children drugs in the early days to make movies that we would enjoy. It's like sickening. It's really quite sickening. So that's how I see it. I see it as that we are people who have been afflicted by this disease of addiction, and that only a power greater than myself can restore me to sanity. In that sense, this is a huge step. that this is huge. If we're inviting the God of the universe into my problem, and it says earlier in the book, um, God will solve our problem. So, what if we struggle? Well, the good news is we just have to have an open concept of God. It says, much to our relief, we discovered we did not need to consider another's conception of God, or accept, however inadequate, was sufficient to make the approach and the effect a contact with Him. As soon as we admitted the possible existence of a creative intelligence, a spirit of the universe underlying the totality of things, we began to be possessed of a new sense of power and direction, provided we took other simple steps. We found that God does not make too hard terms with those who seek Him. To us, the room of spirit is broad, roomy, all inclusive, never excluding or forbidding to those who earnestly seek. It is open, we believe, to all men. As a person, we don't have to agree with everything in this book. For me, I think that the wording today, if we read this, would look different than how they were maybe possibly meaning it. The gist of it is God loves you. He wants you to connect with Him. And if He made things so difficult, no one would find Him. I think that's the gist of this. I had heard a gentleman, or not heard, I read this in a book, but he suggested that God Himself might be anonymous in these rooms. Meaning He's not trying to be anonymous, but people might not know exactly who He is before God's love starts to manifest itself in your life and start to help you with your addiction. And when you start to get helped by your addiction one day at a time, little by little, or sometimes suddenly, you have this experience with God and blown away. That's like, are you kidding? And I get to see this for the last 30 some years. I'd say more once I really got the steps myself and showed the steps this way, I see more and more miracles of people saying, I finally had it. Erik's been talking about God. So they're driving on the way to take their loved one to treatment or to pick up their loved one from treatment. And they say they had this experience where God started to reveal Himself, and they started to feel peace, and they started to feel like there is a solution. And they started to let go of the muscle tension and to let go of this holding on, trying harder. There are addicts that shake their head and say, I don't know how I ever got sober. I mean, I had tried for years treatment centers, therapists, punishments, legal consequences. And finally, when I had had enough, maybe out of exhaustion, it's like a person just passing out spiritually, going, whatever, God, just do whatever you want. Then God begins to restore their life to sanity. The word surrender, I think it goes back to Latin, or in etymology, means to be a patient. Yeah, to be a patient means to surrender. So if I'm a patient at a clinic or getting a surgery, I'm surrendering to what the great physician wants to do with me. If I'm with me, it sounds horrible that way, but there is this sense, whatever you want to have happen, I guess you're going to do this and this. Patience in traffic probably means surrendering to the process of, okay, I can't make the traffic move any faster. So we surrender ourselves to this power, and power I don't think is meant to be impersonal. It's meant to be descriptive, that we need power. It says we asked ourselves but one short question. This is the top of the middle of page 47. Do I now believe, or am I even willing to believe, that there's a power greater than myself As soon as the man can say that he does believe or is willing to believe, we emphatically assure him that he is on his way. It has been repeatedly proven among us that upon this simple cornerstone, a wonderfully effective spiritual structure can be built. That's steps 2. There's not much to it, but there's everything to it. It's like turning a corner. You can continue to read this. It's very good writing. I experienced when I was in a college. They said this is probably one of the better apologetics for talking about God. One has to ask, why does this program work? Why is it still here? It's been around maybe 80 years now. There doesn't seem to be a lot of money flowing through its veins. There doesn't seem to be a lot of power other than God is expressed in their group conscience. I will say that a lot of step 2 for me is letting go of prejudice, letting go of our own reasoning. It's not going to work too well to just hold on to my own reasoning about things. Unless I want to, and then I ask myself, how well is this turning out for me? It says, here's another step 2 section. This is page 55. Actually, we were fooling ourselves, for deep down in every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God. It may be obscured by calamity, by pomp, by worship of other things, but in some form or another, it is there. For faith in a power greater than ourselves and miraculously demonstrating of that power in human lives are facts as old as man himself. We found the great reality deep within us. In the last analysis, it is only there that he may be found. It was so with us. And it talks about a wonderful story. I want to finish with this. I had heard this just recently. Someone shared that this, and we've all seen this, a father and a small child, and the small child is like toddler and is tired of walking and says, up, up, up. And so the dad picks up the child, puts the child in his arms, and the child puts his head on his shoulder and begins to fall asleep. And you can see that it's like weight. I would use the word dead weight, but it's like the child's muscles have so relaxed in the arms of their father that there's no tension, there's complete safety, that there is trust, there is surrender. To the point where we can actually sleep, where we can find rest for our souls. Because we are weary. We are heavy laden with addiction. And we can find rest for our souls by going to the arms of our Father, and we say, up, up.